Awesome. Great.
Right.
Well, that's all going now, and welcome everybody who's just joined us for another episode of Dr. Compost, where we dig a little bit deeper and answer the questions that have come up this week. We have Patricia, Jessica, and Ginny that have joined us, and now we have one other person, which is great. They keep coming in. But yeah, we've got a few questions that have come up over the week, and we have a few that are in one of our other forums. But I'd like to first give the opportunity to everybody here in this room. Ginny, I believe you were first. So do you want to unmute yourself and just share a little bit about what's going on for you and what kind of questions have come up?
Hi.
Hello.
Hi. I don't really have any questions right now. My big concern was the heat. It's 100 degrees here.
Okay.
But I put cold water or ice water bottles in the worm bed, so I think that's good.
That's perfect.
But I'm here
that's
just
exactly
to learn.
Mhm.
Oh, good.
Great.
Fantastic.
Thanks.
Yeah, that's great. I'm glad you brought up the heat. There's been a lot of people in the community talking about it, especially in Europe. There's a few heat waves going on, and we wrote a blog about this last year or the year before. One of the techniques, putting frozen bottles in your sub pod as a little mini worm AC, if you will. The other ones are to add additional bedding material or to stick a shade, some sort of umbrella on top of it. But let us know how you go. Do you have anything to share on that, Peter? Composting?
Well, I would just say the first step is adding shade over the top of the lid of the sub pod, just because it's a brown color and it'll absorb the sun and radiate some of that heat inside, even with the insulation on top. So Gene, if you don't have your sub pod in shade, I would add that as an additional thing to the frozen water bottles, and then the worms will be doing perfectly well.
Okay, that's good. I do need to get an umbrella, so I will do that.
It'll make a big difference. You'll be surprised. It'll cool things down quite a bit.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Well, if anything else comes up, Ginny, feel free to just unmute yourself. Patricia, did you have a question for us?
Hi. A couple of weeks ago, you talked about putting pasta in and cutting it up real fine, which I've been doing, and they seem to love it.
Yeah.
What about rice? Can you do
Same.
that?
If the rice is cooked,
Yeah.
is it?
Yeah.
Yeah. It'll be a very similar sort of thing where these are starches that will provide a lot of food for the microbes, and then the worms will gorge on those microbes that are feeding off the pasta and the rice. So, yep, those are both good choices. You'll see that there's sort of an upper limit of how much you can add at one time. But even if you get a bit of mold, then you just stir that in, and you'll just find that the worm population will keep adjusting upward if you're doing that on a regular basis, and you'll end up with a very high density of worms.
Yeah, so I don't make pasta that often, but I always save a little if I do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And put it in the fridge and then cut it up for my next feeding.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Some spoiled worms you've got there.
Yeah, you're thinking of the worms, that they'll reward you with making lots of great compost for you by doing that. So it's good.
That's wonderful.
But when I planted in my raised beds, I also harvested some compost, and in with every plant I put like a trowel full of the compost.
Great.
So I'm hoping that'll be make my plants lovelier this year.
Oh, it will. I guarantee it. The other thing you can consider doing is making an extract, just basically taking some of the compost and basically putting it in a mesh bag. Like I go to yeah. So the reason I'm bringing that up is if you want a fast impact, if you want to see like almost overnight results, or certainly within a couple of days, if you water the foliage of your plants with that, you'll see them brighten up and green up and get more luxuriant. just a few days after you do that, whereas the compost will be more of a time release kind of
Yeah.
proposition.
What about tomatoes? They tell you not to
Oh,
water the leaves.
yes, I would, in that case, I would actually water the base and not the
Okay.
foliage. Good point.
Okay, all
Yeah.
right. Good. Well, I did some of that last year. I haven't made any of that yet this year, but I will.
Okay.
How often can you do that?
Oh, if I've got the time, I'll do it once a week.
Once a
Just
day?
once a week.
Oh, once a week. Okay.
Yeah. Because basically, with given the life cycle of your leafy greens, they're hitting the ground running, and they're going to go from the start to the end in less than 6 months typically. So weekly
Yeah.
feedings will give you very very robust growth on them.
Okay,
So
great.
especially my lettuces, it keeps me in fresh salads every day.
Yeah. Good.
Keeping up that
Thank you.
chlorophyll. Awesome, that's great. And if you get a chance to take a photo of your plants after the next month, that would be great. And just pop them up on the grow.
Okay.
Love to see.
Okay.
Love to see your progress.
Will do.
Thanks, Patricia. Jessica, do you have any questions?
Hey, sorry, I'm still on mute. I think my only concern is I know I talked to him last Wednesday. It was a little bit too dry. So, I've been making sure that I've been keeping it pretty much moist and watered. I check it every day. My biggest concern is if I'm feeding them enough. And I know because it seems like it just disappears very fast. And I'm probably only feeding them every 3 to 4 days. But depending, the minimum is probably about 2 cups, but probably upwards of 6, depending on, if I just cleaned out the fridge.
Uh-huh. Well, that's a good sign. It sounds like you've got a very active worm population there. And so what I would say about that is if that's your pace of adding food, the worms will naturally adjust their population for the amount of food you're providing. So if you're what you'll find is that maybe on special occasions, you might have quite a bit more than normal to add, and then you might want to spread that out over more feedings. But I wouldn't worry about if it's disappearing quickly. That's just a sign that your worms are thriving.
All right, awesome. And then the only other one is I've noticed since I've been checking it and making sure it's damp enough, they've been getting in the worm blanket, in it, not just in between it or anything.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
I'm concerned if it it hasn't dried out in the past week, but I'm concerned if I forget a day or something, if that's harmful.
It's fine. They should be able to crawl their way out of it. If they get in, they should be able to crawl out. I wouldn't worry. So it's the sort of thing where if I'm really being conscientious when I'm pulling the blanket off, I'll fold it with the side facing the bedding together so that when I'm setting it aside, the worms aren't being exposed to the air. So that's the only thing to think about. If they're all the way through the blanket and you're trying to protect them from the sun while you're feeding the subpod, then you can find a shady spot to put them while you're feeding the worms.
Okay. Yeah, most of the time I kind of just set it on because I have a raised bed one.
Mhm.
I kind of set it on the dirt so they're facing the dirt.
Perfect. Yeah.
On the outside, so that way they can, if they want to get out, they can.
Yeah,
But
that sounds great.
I don't know. I'm just concerned because sometimes I feel like they're stuck.
I know what you're talking about, where they're kind of caught in the fibers and they're just you're almost stuck in there. Is that what you mean? You see a worm and it's trapped?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
that's why I've been trying to be conscientious of making sure it's wet enough.
Well, the other option, Jessica, is you can if you don't have a problem with ants, is you can actually avoid wetting the worm blanket altogether, because the only real reason for wetting the blanket is if you have super hot weather and the bedding is drying out, and so you're wetting the blanket to keep the bedding from drying too quickly. Or you've got a problem with insects that are colonizing because they're attracted to a drier condition. But otherwise, if you just leave the blanket as it is, they'll be less tempted to crawl inside.
I don't even have a blanket on my sub pod. So right now, I mean, I've got my population. I've had it there for 3 months. They're thriving. I check on the bedding material, and that's not to say it's best practice. If you've got hot summers, then yes, put the blanket on. But I do feel like maybe Peter has a different opinion. Once the population has built up, the blanket really becomes obsolete in some ways. It helps a bit, but the bedding material is the most important factor for me.
Well, once you have deeper bedding, I agree, the system will be more resilient. But what the worms do is they avoid the light, so the food that sits at the top of the bed will be less eaten if you don't have a blanket on top. And so if you really want your food to be consumed readily, then the blanket on top just provides a screening from the light so that the worms get to that top food faster. That's these are details. So there's like Peter's, it's funny, we're a good team because Peter's the one who like says, hey, we don't have to get too fussy about these things. So he's the counterpoint of like, ultra diligence. So we're good that way.
Yeah. I tend to have the lazy option sometimes. I feel like maybe I take the worms for granted. I think they're a bit more resilient than they are. But I do want to jump on. Rebecca is hanging out here patiently, and I was wondering if you had any questions, Rebecca.
Oh, hi. I've just recently got my new mod bed. I'm going to assemble it today, which is exciting.
Exciting.
I just wanted to know, I had been using a off the ground tumble compost system. Can I use the worms from that, or do you still recommend buying specific?
No, absolutely. Those are perfect to put into your system. It's ideal.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fantastic. That's great. You're setting it up. You must have been one of the first people to get one because we've only really had them out for a few weeks. So that's awesome. I'd love to hear your feedback when you set it up. And are you putting it on a balcony or just outside on a patio?
I think I'll put it, it's just sort of near my garden shed. I've only got a small paved backyard. So yeah, sort of like a patio. But yeah, I pre-ordered it a while ago. So it was exciting to have it turn up, and
great.
Today's project.
Fantastic. And we have, I'm not sure, once you open the box, you'll realize we have video instructions on how to set it up because it is a few pieces in there. So I highly recommend watching the video.
Okay, will do.
Fantastic. Cool. Well, I missed Elka. Did I say your name correctly? Leke.
Elka.
Elka?
Elke.
Elke. Welcome.
Elke. Thank you. And if you're German, it's Elke. It's Elke in Australia and in
Wales. Okay.
Elke. Yeah, that sounds very nice.
Elke's fine. I don't have any questions today. I'm just learning a lot. Every time I get to join in, I always learn stuff. So it's fantastic.
Oh, great.
Great.
So I've started my sub pod is probably, I don't know, a third full.
Okay.
Just come back from 3 weeks away, and I just and I was growing some carrots, the first time ever. So I had tiny carrots and lots of foliage, and so I put a lot of that foliage into the sub pod. Yeah, is that? I also kept a lot for my green smoothie, and then I put some in the sub pod.
Yes, if you're really keen, you can actually try cooking up the greens in a vegetable stock.
Oh, I'll tell my partner that, he's the cook, so great.
Okay.
I've also seen pesto.
At least some of them. So there's that magic combination between carrot and celery, and so you can achieve some of the same result with the foliage from the celery and the foliage from the carrot, because obviously those are least used. But you can experiment a little bit and surprise yourself. They'll add another dimension to your
Oh, great! Yeah. We've just been, I just made a green smoothie yesterday and today with it, with some celery, and it's just divine. Yeah.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
What I'd recommend when you're adding it to the sub pod is just chopping it up finely, and then it'll disappear faster.
Well, I didn't do that. So after today's webinar, I'm going to go back up there and chop it up.
Yeah, the reason.
Lazy.
Well, the reason I bring it up is just when you add the aerator, when you're spinning it with the aerator, it'll tend to get tangled up in the aerator. That's all.
Yeah, it did. All right. Yeah, thank you.
Sure.
Good to hear. Okay, so we've come to the second half of Dr. Compost, where I'm actually going to upload a few images from our community on Facebook, actually. It's called the Subpod Enthusiast page, and it's really active. And there were some questions on there that I think are really common. One of them being fungi, like mushrooms growing in your subpod. Another one about bioplastics. So it's a milk carton, which is compostable, but has polyethylene. And the last one is looking at little bugs. So because they're really, really popular questions, I thought it would be valuable to show you the photos and to actually talk a little bit about these topics as well. And if anybody has any questions during these, feel free to just unmute yourself. All right, let's look at the first one. So can we see that?
Yep, that's good.
Mushrooms. That's a lot of mushrooms, Peter, in a compost. What does it mean?
Well, so the two reasons you'll have a lot of mushrooms are you've got a lot of moisture happening in your system, and that'll favor the fruiting bodies coming up and sprouting like that. So the good news is that you have a rich microbial activity happening in the system. You'll probably have a fair amount of carbon in there because they'll feed off the carbon as well. And so my recommendation is if it's bothering the person who has all this fungi, then I would add a bit more bedding, dry bedding, to reduce the moisture levels, so that you're not feeling overwhelmed by all the.
I think
all
that
the
is water
fungi.
there, isn't it? There looks like a little puddle there potentially.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So I think
Yeah.
it's a bit on the wet side, and so by adding especially coconut coir, you'll bulk up the bedding. You'll fluff it up, which will add air in, and volume, and you'll see that that level of microbial growth diminish a bit. So generally speaking, when I see that, it looks like the risk could be over time that it's just so wet that there's less oxygen in the bedding, and so the compost won't give you that same level of aerobic activity. So anyway, that's, as a detail, I would recommend for the person to experiment by buying one of those coconut coir bricks and rehydrating it just maybe a little bit less than usual, and stirring some of that in, just kind of breaking up the processes, and then they'll see that it'll probably reduce the number of mushrooms they're getting.
Awesome. That's great. Yeah, and it's not game over if you see mushrooms.
Yeah, no, I would say when you're seeing excessive signs like this, it's a sign that probably the system's a little out of balance, and so you can correct it by, in this case, a bit drier. It's a bit on the wet side.
Awesome. That's great. Thank you. Now I'm going to read out this question because it was quite a long one, and just to give a bit of context, but can we see that?
Yes, that one's good.
Awesome. All right. Give me a moment. So this is the bioplastic question, and it's from Lee James. Hi, I have a query about composting the new compostable milk cartons, specifically Brown's milk cartons. I've been told that the sugarcane lining can't be composted as it's still combined with polyethylene, which is a type of plastic constitute, and that I would end up with nanoplastics in my compost. I've tried shredding up one carton to test it. The worms seem to have done a pretty good job and only small bits of lining is left. Does anyone know anything about this? Thanks. I love this question because it's so common these days that we have more and more products that are compostable, and that word compostable gets thrown a lot. And I seem like it's a bit of a spectrum there. Some of them still have plastics in them and will take 25 years to compost. So people can technically still label it as compost. Which is a bit absurd for me, but yeah, Peter, what are your thoughts on this specific?
Yeah, I'll say a couple things about that. So typically there are a lot of paper or heavy paper cartons that are holding liquids, and the old-fashioned approach was to coat the inside with wax to keep them from getting too soft, like the old-fashioned milk bottles, milk cartons. but then they switched to a plastic coating. And so the difficulty is everything else will break down and leave the plastic coating behind, and that'll just break down into smaller and smaller pieces, but it will end up as microplastic. And we're still learning more about the effect of microplastics in the soil. So the one thing I have seen is that people have done some controlled studies where they've deliberately added microplastics to soil and then studied what happens to that soil afterwards. And it turns out that the microbial life that's most affected are the small arthropods. So these are the small insects that tend to do some of the breaking down, and the size range is such that it interferes with them, much the way you would expect to happen in the oceans, where you have marine life ingesting plastic and then it interferes with their digestion. So generally speaking, if you're being conscientious about the soil, then you would want to avoid putting those kinds of plastics in your system in order to give you the best microbial life. If you get a little bit in there that just slips in by accident, I wouldn't fret about it, because we're discovering that there's actually quite a bit of microplastic in our environment. And there is some evidence now that there's certain kinds of microbes that are learning or specializing in breaking down certain plastics. And so over the very long term, probably these will be broken down. And we're, in a way, biologically, we're kind of selecting for a biological life that can start to recognize these exotic materials and break them down. But I would sort of leave it up to the person and their own feelings about and the other factor of this too is that if you're concerned about ingesting microplastics, then I would avoid putting it in a system where you're actually using your compost to grow food, because there might be some residual microplastics that would contaminate the food, especially if they were uncooked foods. Then they might be clinging to the say lettuces or the greens. So that's kind of my personal choices. I tend to avoid using them. And even some of these compostable bags, I'm finding that they take quite a long time to break down. And so I tend to put them in other systems, because they as they take a while to break down, they'll tend to wrap themselves around your aerator as you're turning the compost. And their time frame for breakdown is, in my system, is in the order of a couple months. And so I tend to find.
I've just experienced that. I bought some compostable bin liners and tried that in the sub pod, and they're still there and they get caught up in the thingy bob. So yeah.
Yes,
exactly. I'm glad that you're saying that. Avoid.
Yes,
Yeah.
well, so I think there's other ways to compost those, but the good news is because they are going to break down, then there's, you don't have to worry that they'll end up in landfill as 100-year-old trash. So yeah, I was optimistic and hopeful that I'd be able to do that. Like you, I just found out that no, this is annoying. They're staying out of my sub pod.
That's a really good topic though, bioplastics. I feel like it's opened up a can of worms there. But I do want to get your personal thoughts on how pedantic are you? Like, there's stickers on an avocado or an apple. Obviously, if you could, you would remove those plastic, but if it falls in your compost and you're turning it and you see one there, what comes up?
Yeah, my thing about that is, if I'm actually harvesting the compost and I see an intact sticker, I'll just fish it out.
Right.
And throw it to one side, because normally the time frame of compost is such that you'll be harvesting within 6 months of adding your food waste. And so in that amount of time, if it's a resistant plastic label, it'll still be there, fully intact, and you just fish it aside, and if you see it. And so yeah, I wouldn't be super stressed about it.
I've heard stories of people buying compost from landscape suppliers and nurseries, and they'd follow up with a test in this case and found they were composting pellets. So all the toxins that were going in to treat that wood. So I do think out there's a lot of toxins that we're probably not aware of just in buying soil, but every day. So it'd be hard to control. I guess that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, but you bring up a good point, Peter, and that the beauty of doing your own composting is you get to know what goes into it. So you can take the level of care that you want for your own home system, which is very appealing for people who want to avoid having, mystery additions to their diet.
Yeah, that's exactly right. We've got Linda that just joined in, the beautiful background. Linda, do you have any questions for us?
Oh, you'll have to unmute yourself, Linda.
Yeah, I
There you
know.
go.
I was just
Okay.
remembering how to do it.
Okay.
So can you turn off this light, please? I'm new to this, and I did ask 2 questions and 2 people answered, which was quite helpful. So
Good.
maybe not necessary, but I didn't find in the directions, I'm new. So I put on a, just went through the first few weeks with my sub pod, and had been feeding the worms, but nothing in the directions said lift up the wet blanket, then feed them. So I've been feeding them on top of the wet blanket.
Okay.
I couldn't figure out how you're supposed to stir everything up with the wet blanket there, because it doesn't help you at all.
Yes.
So anyway, someone answered the question.
That's super helpful feedback. Well, Peter I'm sure he's already been hearing that, and he's already mentally reviewing, looking over the instructions. So that's great. Thanks for that.
No, thank you for sharing that. That's really good to know. But how's it going since you've discovered the worm blanket needs to come off? Are they thriving?
Well, I'm not at home. I'm not at home right now. The background you see is Canada. I'm currently in Canada.
Okay.
And I'm just hoping the worms survived. They're under they were placed under the wet blanket as per the directions initially. And then I've been putting food on top and leaves and such, just as it was directed to, but I wasn't putting the wet blanket on top. So occasionally I see the worms above, but I suspect they're busy maybe under the blanket. I'm hoping they're still alive. I don't know. I'll find out when I get home and lift everything up.
If you have someone who can visit your place and move the food from above the blanket to below, that would be super helpful for the worms.
Okay. All right. Hopefully some of them have.
It's a big favor. Can you come and
survived.
Yeah.
Well, it sounds like this.
Taking care of my cat, so.
Okay. Well, she can do it. That's great.
We'll add worms.
The thing is I think already a few of them have survived. There were a few that managed to crawl on top of the blanket, but you'll be doing a lot more of them a favor by moving it below. So.
Yeah. So are they starving underneath there?
Yes, probably they are. So.
I'm so sorry. Oh, bad. Okay. All right. And then the second question I had, which someone else said they also had the same problem. I made sure everything was clicked and secured, and then I put it in the ground, and we put soil and rocks around the outside edge, and the walls began to collapse. So I put in wooden dowels, the correct size of wooden dowel, in order to maintain the walls somewhat. It's a little uneven, and I'm going to have to cut some more dowels, I think. But that can't be right, is it?
No. Here's my recommendation, Linda. So it is the case that because this is a flat pack, that it doesn't have the pressure generated when you actually put the sub pod into a raised garden bed, but when you put it into the ground, the extra pressure from the ground can actually push in the walls a bit. So I created a little online tutorial where you actually bolt the top 4 corners, just a simple bolt that goes in and a nut on the inside. There's a convenient place to do a little bit of drilling. And so in about 10 minutes of work, you can bolt the 4 corners, and then you'll make it sturdy enough that the sides won't collapse. So
Okay, so the
it's
towels are working at the moment, but.
okay.
I'll post
Well,
them out.
if need be, down the line, I had a video that I've made that shows the process. So our CS team will be able to, send that your way, and you'll see the process. But yeah, it shouldn't take long at all to bolt it in place, and then it'll be, if you use stainless steel bolts, then it'll last forever. So
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
sure.
You're welcome. Feel free to take some photos and send it to us at hello@subpod.com. And then, our customer service team is awesome. It might be a simpler fix, but as Peter said, he's made a whole video to walk you through those steps. Happy to help you there. We have another question, which I'm going to have to pull up because there is little white bugs. We have a video which was on our SubPod enthusiast group, and me and Peter were looking at these guys before, and we'll try to determine what they actually were. Let me just screen share this with you guys. So it's on the Facebook group. So apologies that it's all here. You guys can get a quick little look at that. It's hard to see, but they do have legs, and I'm just going to play it one more time. It's a short video. They have legs. They're scurrying around pretty quickly. They have antennae, so they're not a larvae. But yeah, Peter, what are your thoughts on that?
So without knowing 100% what they are, my guess is that they're colonizing the upper surface of a worm blanket starting to break down. And my guess is that probably they're hanging out on the surface. They're probably not disturbing the worms underneath. Because there are quite a few of them, it might be a warning sign to look inside and make sure the bedding is not too wet and not too dry. That would be my first impulse to see. Just have a look at. So we could always ask the person on the enthusiast page if they wanted to take some images of the bedding underneath. But generally speaking, when you have these small arthropods like these, they're not a problem for the worms. They tend to coexist in the soil.
That's what I was about to ask. Yeah, Chelsea's asked, are they harmful? I think we get a lot of people asking if it's going to harm the worms or hurt the worms. And
no, actually, to the contrary, they're usually actually contributing to breaking down the organic material and making it smaller, which is helpful for the worms and the microbes. So it's a group project to take it from full-size food down into soil nutrients.
That's a really good way to look at it. Yeah, it is a big project and ecosystem that's doing it all, not just the worms. But is there a point where people should be alarmed? Because there is, and I guess it's hard to give general rules here.
Yeah, what I would say is that you want to learn about what's starting. If something's breeding up in quantity inside the subpod, my first question would be, are they affecting the worms? And if not, then are they affecting the plants in your garden bed? So the other possibility is they might be something that would feed on plant roots or plant material, and you don't want to be creating a nursery for invasive bugs that are going to attack your plants. So there, just if you have such a thing happening and it's not obvious what they are, then you can put up the question in the Grow Hub, and we'll do a bit of research to figure out. But what comes to mind is certainly there are some things like slugs that can be attracted to the moist environment inside the subpod, and they will obviously be nibbling away on your plants. So I tend to try to keep them out of the subpod. And one of the ways of doing that is when you can, not let the subpod get too wet inside. If you have a slug infestation, there's a couple of things that are worth thinking about. One of them is there's a natural based pellet you can buy that's an iron chelate pellet. And what that does is, because slugs and snails have a blood that uses copper instead of iron, by adding a bit of iron, it interferes, and so you'll end up discouraging them from from taking off in your system, but the amount of iron they're producing will be harmless for the worms and obviously beneficial for the plants. So that's a natural approach to control
That's really
things.
cool. And I like the fact, I think we've brought this up a couple of times, is that observation is such an important key here. If you notice that there is a lot of ants or a lot of slugs or cockroaches, then that's typically an indicator that your system is out of balance. And so how do you tip it back into balance to favor the worms again? And it's usually pretty easy with the subpod. I think with other systems, it can be a little bit more problematic. But yeah, from my experience, it's like feeding it less, you're maybe overfeeding, or there's not enough carbon, or you might need to grab some diatomaceous earth. Yeah. Oh, we should probably end now, Peter. We're actually pumping on overtime. Got a little
All
bit.
right. Any last burning questions from the guys in the audience? You guys all set? All right.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, everybody, for joining in today. And yeah, really looking forward to, if you have any other questions that come up, please just pop them up on the Grow Hub. Happy to answer them during the week. But yeah, it's really awesome to see everybody else answer each other's questions. I think that was one of our key motives for creating the Grow Hub community, was to build up other people so we can keep spreading that knowledge.
And it's also the case, because this is becoming worldwide. Everyone has their interesting local conditions in different states and different countries. And so we get to learn as much as you guys about what happens in subpods that's deployed around the world. So it's an exciting time.
Exactly. Great.
Thank you, Peter.
You're welcome.
Bye.
See you later. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.